All right, in order to finish on time, I think we should probably go ahead and get started. Welcome to BrightBuilt Home's Lunch and Learn webinar. Today we will be speaking to the BrightBuilt Home process, which is something that obviously every BrightBuilt Home homeowner goes through. It is something that we've worked on since the beginning, and we're happy to share this with you today. On the webinar are Carlin Meyer, Jessica Benner, and myself, Jay Sandiford. Excited to have you here and be talking about this process. BrightBuilt Home was started really back about 11 years ago when the first BrightBuilt barn was built. It was actually founded as a company in 2013. We are located in beautiful Portland, Maine. We primarily design net zero homes or in high performance homes. We are a proponent of off-site construction, which Parlin will describe a bit to you now. Oh, no, sorry. We're going to talk a little bit about what sets us apart in the industry. One of the main things when I'm talking to people about how we're able to build from Maine to Virginia is this network of builders that we put together who are able to produce and accomplish the site work that we need and finish off the modules as they arrive on site. One of the other things I think that sets us apart in the industry, specifically against an architect, if you're looking to hire one of those, is a fixed fee design. So you know going into the project what the design and implementation costs are going to be with BrightBuilt. We do have quite a bit of flexibility and customization within our design, and you work with an architectural designer to lay out the home, to site the home for the best solar gain, and then obviously include your preferences within the layout. Our homes also perform very well, and I think that's a big differentiator in the marketplace. We're constantly working on our process to make it better for you, and today that's what we're going to speak to. So over the past few years, we've done 100+ homes that are either in design, being built, or in the factory. Right now, Parlin will take over and talk to you a little bit about the idea of building things off-site.
Okay, so why is it that we are such big proponents of off-site construction? Well, there are several reasons, and several reasons that we find it to be such a compelling way to build a home. Obviously, there are efficiencies in centralizing anything that you're building rather than bringing things in piecemeal. A common analogy, of course, is nobody buys a car and has it brought to their home and assembled in their driveway. Off-site construction for homes follows a similar premise of pre-building the vast majority of the structure such that it can be delivered to the site nearly complete. One of the fringe benefits of that approach is that the price of the overall build of the home is actually fairly predictable from the outset, from prior to the beginning of construction. So that price predictability is certainly something that's very compelling to most of our clients, as well as us in our efforts to make these homes, these high performance off-site built homes, as attainable as possible. The approach also allows for a more streamlined process and a more concise process in the decision making when it comes to finishes and design in general. At BrightBuilt, we're working from known designs and then making modifications to those designs to suit the clients and suit the site. Or in a couple cases, we're also starting from scratch and doing custom designs. This approach, the off-site approach, also means that you are making a lesser impact on your site as well as your neighborhood. So if you live either in a tight site that's an urban infill and you have a lot of close neighbors, you're impacting their lives in a much lesser degree by bringing in a home that is almost 100% complete by the time it arrives to the house. And therefore, the time of construction on site and the level of noise produced on site is substantially reduced. So that has advantages. It also has advantages with respect to cost, because you are not hiring or renting equipment or doing various things that are extended over a longer period of time and therefore would cost more money. And just in general, at BrightBuilt, we really strive to guide clients through the entire process from the very beginning of design through the final move-in day of the home. So we are intensively involved in working very directly with the clients throughout the entire design and initial production kickoff process. And then throughout the remainder of production and construction, we remain on hand and available to help coordinate, answer questions, facilitate, do whatever is required. So we really remain your advocate well beyond the design phase and help deliver the entire home from soup to nuts. So at this time, Jessica's now going to speak to specifically the BrightBuilt process.
So you're seeing now a snapshot of the BrightBuilt timeline. It's a 7-milestone process from start to finish, from design to move-in. Laid out, first milestone is the sign-on design kickoff meeting. Second milestone is the design process, the actual design meetings and finishes selection. The third milestone is pricing. The fourth milestone is the production kickoff. The fifth milestone is actual production and site preparation. The sixth milestone is delivery of the modules and finish out on site. And then the seventh is the move-in. Altogether, this whole process takes typically anywhere from 9 to 12 months. And with a note that for sidekicks in particular, there is a shorter time frame expected. So the first milestone, you sign on for design, and we have our design kickoff meeting. Up until this point, you've been speaking with Jay about your lot, your expectations for design, your budget. And so those are the questions essentially that we answer. You have land, and then we identify a builder that is available in the location where you're hoping to build. And we make sure that your budget is in range. Your expectations of scope and finish are generally within range. And we identify your project goals. So we sit down at our design kickoff meeting and we discuss all of the specifics of your design and sort of your dreams for the house. Milestone 2 is the design rounds and finishes selection. So depending on what you sign on for, there's 1 to 3 rounds of revisions in design. The first round, we take our discussions in the design kickoff meeting and produce a design that's suited to your needs. The second round of design, we go into greater detail and sort of refine that design according to your feedback, and then also spend a great deal of time talking about the finishes that you'd like in your home, walking through the options from the factory, as well as options that are available locally to you. And then the third round, again, just a further refining of details. At this time, we typically talk about very specific things like what type of base cabinets you're going to have in your kitchen, and lay out a lighting plan and a mechanical plan. Milestone 3 is pricing. And basically what we do is up until this point, we've been discussing all of the scope and the finishes for your project. So you've identified your expectations, and we give that set of expectations to the builder, and they are able to price it according to your wishes. At the same time, we're updating factory pricing. So we're sending all of this information in to the factory, and they are giving a quote back to the builder. And then we're also engaging consultants and subcontractors as needed per the scope of your home. The fourth milestone is the production kickoff. And so up until this point, we've been preparing the design, the finishes, we've been getting the team on board, we've gotten the builder estimate, and the team sits down and has what we call a production kickoff meeting, where we discuss the shop drawings that the factory has prepared, and then review and go through sort of this back and forth, revisions, sort of a secondary review and more revisions if needed. And at the very end of that, the drawings and the purchase of the modules through the factory is sort of ready to go, and that would be the trigger point for signing off on the factory portion of it, and would also be paired with a deposit paid to the factory at that time.
Okay, and then so at that point, we have triggered the beginning of ordering all those materials that you as a client have decided on. The factory is getting into gear in terms of getting their act together and pulling the framing up. So they're getting that ball rolling, and concurrently, the general contractor is on site handling things like the permitting for the project, clearing and preparing the land as need be, maybe demolishing an existing tear down or moving another structure or clearing trees as necessary, putting in the driveway, and then creating the connections either by virtue of putting in the well and septic or tying in with city water and sewer for the public or private utilities required for the home. Once all of that is complete, then they proceed with excavation and the actual pouring of the foundation. So in the time frame from that point at which the sign-off has been made on the purchase order and the drawings, everything is understood, everything is correct as is coming from the factory, and the factory begins their process of framing, insulating, rough-in, electrical, plumbing, windows, doors, etc. At the same time, the site is being prepared and the foundation is being poured. So this is one of the big aspects of what helps truncate that timeline when doing offsite construction, is that you can do these two things concurrently that typically will have to happen in sequence on a site-built project. We then come to milestone 6, which is usually the beginning of this milestone is a very momentous day for most clients. It's the day that the modules arrive from the factory and are set on the foundation that has been sitting, waiting, curing and waiting for the arrival of the modules. And then the remainder of this milestone is the finish out process. So that's the time during which different subcontractors come into the house, tradespeople come into the house to install the systems, to do any interior finishes that have not been completed by the factory, vis-a-vis bathroom tile, kitchen counters such as granite or quartz. Those cannot be installed by the factory because the transportation could damage them. But with the vast majority of the house arriving complete from sheetrock to exterior sheathing, it really leaves finishing touches and systems installation to be done once the modules are on site, connected, and weathered in. So this wrap-up milestone really represents anywhere from 2 to 4 months, generally speaking, for those remaining aspects. And then, of course, milestones, everybody's favorite month is the move-in day. Really, really big day, just representing the culmination of those decisions that were made in design and in finish selections, and just the process of the build out off site, the arrival of those modules on site, and everything comes together. So that's the 7th step. Now, one thing that was in that initial slide of the timeline that was shown up to the upper corner is called wildcards. Now, these are things that invariably come into play with various projects. As many people understand, construction is not a perfect science. It's a process whereby there can be things that come up that were unexpected at the outset. So in the purposes of describing our process, we are representing those as wildcards. They're unknowns. There are things that can crop up that can that are a known entity for potentially adding time to a project and potentially adding cost to a project, depending on what they are. So one thing that is a little bit of a wild card, but generally can be a known going in if the local town or city has very clear outline to what their process is, are regulatory requirements. So that can be anywhere from local permitting for just pulling the building permit and the process involved with that, to an entire design review by the town, to zoning variances, to tie-in fees for water service or sewer service, to all sorts of things. There are many, many different potential regulatory requirements with any given project, and it can be worth an exploration if you're looking to build in a certain area, just to start to get a feel for what that looks like in your particular town where you're aiming to build. Another potential wildcard is, while we have a vast network of builders with whom we have worked on our various BrightBuilts to date, there occasionally is a region that in which we have not yet worked. And so identifying and finding a new builder is part of the process that we offer, and one of the services that we offer. And so if you happen to be in a region where we don't have a builder with whom we've previously worked, we will help you identify qualified builders and help you interview and vet those qualified builders and find for you what, allow you to decide what is a good fit and who is a good fit for you.
Arlen, we have a quick question that kind of goes along with the builder idea, and it's, can a builder be ID'd early to help with lot evaluation, pricing for land, and lot prep?
Absolutely, and definitely in areas where we do have builders, where we've got some folks with whom we've worked for quite some time, they are very game to do that, very game to meet with prospective clients on site, to look at the site, walk the land, make recommendations as to siting potentially if it's a big lot and or has some interesting aspects. So yes, definitely that can be something that's done. And we can certainly do that even with the new builder early on, to identify somebody who would be a good candidate for helping with that. Another wild card can be bidding. If there's an interest in putting projects out to bid to get competitive bids from different builders, it's important to recognize that that can add anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks or more to the timeline. And generally speaking, it needs to happen towards the end of design, when the design is fairly fixed and known and understood. We have clear pricing from the factory for the portion of the work that they will be doing, and the finishes selections are fairly complete, so that the builder can, any builder who's putting in a bid can more accurately make estimates as to what the costs of the project may be. So while bidding can seem a prudent approach in order to get competitive pricing, we have really largely discouraged it and moved away from it, because in our experience, what we've seen is that the numbers generally come in pretty close. And what's more important, we believe, in working with a builder is finding someone who a client feels that they can trust, and who feels like a good working relationship, personality-wise and otherwise. Costs generally are not necessarily a good indication of a good fit. So bidding, unless there's ample time in the timeline or a full understanding of what that adds to the project, it's something that we generally don't recommend. Scope and cost creep is obviously a wild card. The scope is what drives the cost creep generally. So scope creep is where things get started. We have the preliminary conversations with a prospective client about what their intent is for a given project. And for example, they might say they're interested in a 2,000 square foot home with a front porch. And as we move through design, a screen porch gets added, a walkout basement gets added, an attached garage gets added. Things begin to get tacked onto the project. And that's a wild card that both can increase the timeline of the project, as well as obviously as the costs, because those additional elements will add cost to the overall project. Finishes selections in and of themselves can be a wild card, because it depends really entirely on the decision-making process of the clients involved, whether they want that to be a simplified process where we narrow down the choices and they can choose between a couple options, or where they're more deeply involved and going out and shopping different vendors in order to make their final selection. So that is more a wild card in terms of timing, so how long that will add to the project in the design phase. It depends on the people involved and the decisions that are being made. Weather is, yes, go ahead.
We have a question that kind of goes along with that. And
Okay.
the idea, Dave is asking about what interior components are typically completed in the factory. How far can they go towards the finished home in the factory?
Great question. Really can go very, very far along, and it depends to some extent on what type of finishes are selected for each actual finish. So a bathroom, for example, the bathroom can come fully complete, shower or tub, toilet, and vanity fully installed, vanity even with a granite or quartz countertop fully installed by the factory, all plumbing tied in, installed and stubbed, ready to tie into the main line. But if the desire is for tile in the bathroom, for example, or there's a very specific style vanity, or there, you know, if there is a finer grain of nuance introduced, then some of those elements may not be able to be installed by the factory tile because of the grout seams not being, when you transport and pick the modules, those could suffer damage. So there's certain finishes that need to be done on site, but you could have a nearly fully complete interior finished home delivered to the site. The one major exception for the multiple module homes is flooring. So flooring is typically done on site, and then the exterior of the home, unless it's vinyl siding, is also always done on site. So any exterior siding is always completed on site. So it really depends a little bit on the finish selections that are made to fully answer that question, but it is possible to have the kitchen fully installed, kitchen counter fully installed, kitchen plumbing fully tied in, bathrooms fully done, all interior door, window, and trim installed, and of course the doors and windows themselves, all sheetrock in, primed. So you really, really can have a nearly fully complete home installed with just the finishing touches and the systems themselves to be completed on site. So just to wrap up wild cards, the last two are weather is a wild card potentially. Obviously, this is a much lesser factor when you're doing offsite construction. We can set our homes year round. We can bring them into their site year round, having been built in a climate controlled environment and then brought to the site and weathered in within a day. It's a tremendous advantage, especially in areas that have long, cold winters, such as Maine. So weather is a much lesser wild card in our case, but it can still be a factor depending on, you know, the day of delivery, for example. If it's pouring rain, that will delay the delivery for potentially up to a couple weeks, depending on when the next slot of availability is for the crew and the crane. Financing then is of course a very specific one and very specific to the clients and how they're planning to finance a project. Lenders vary dramatically in what the requirements are for construction loans. But generally speaking, it can be a fairly straightforward process, but it really depends on the lender involved and whether or not that will add time or specific requirements to a given project. Okay, so now we're going to walk through two example projects to help lend some context to our process by telling it through the lens of real stories, real life projects that actually happened. We have changed the names, and the pictures that you will see represent folks with whom we've worked, but not the folks that are specific to the project that we are describing. So, so we're using these as examples to help illustrate what this process really looks like. And Jessica's going to kick that off with the Smiths.
Example one is the Smiths, as Parlin introduced, a project from 2018. The Smiths are a couple of retirees, and they're primarily looking for the opportunity to downsize and to upgrade to make their retired life as comfortable and as maintenance-free as possible. This project is located on the coast of Maine and is a bungalow design. The goals of the project going in, they had a tight budget that we had to very strictly adhere to. And then they were very invested in all of the high performance features that BrightBuilt offers: energy savings, climate control, and a healthy environment. The site conditions for this particular client, they came to us and they owned the land already. They knew that it was a challenging site based on what they saw was ledge on the site, and the orientation was also a challenge given that their views were pointed to the north. They also had hired an independent excavator at that point before we became involved, so they had begun clearing the land and building out the driveway, which was quite long. Their finances were pretty straightforward. They came to us and they were going to finance this new home through the sale of their current home. So what that meant was that moving forward with this project was dependent on the sale of their home, and also the budget was dependent on the sale price of their home. They were aiming for less than $400,000 in 2018. The owner also was capable and excited to attempt some of the finish work as potential cost-saving measures. Next step for this client was to call BrightBuilt, and they had a conversation with Jay, and Jay will tell us a little bit about that. You're on mute.
There you go.
Unmuted. As with most clients, I'm the initial contact here at BrightBuilt, and I was excited to talk to these guys. About 40% of the people I'm speaking with are in the same phase where they're retiring and looking to move into a home that's super energy efficient, that has consistent bills throughout the lifetime of the home. There were some interesting things about the road and how to get into the site. So they were concerned a little bit about that. They initially were interested in a log home, but we're also very interested and intrigued by our bungalow design. So what I was able to do was sit down with them at the office and show them a variety of plan sets that used the bungalow design and showed them how each of the clients had catered that to their site for solar gain and for their preferences. Now these guys had, as Jessica said, a specific view they wanted to take advantage of. So we were also speaking to those and how the model would be reversed in orientation to take advantage of that. And the idea of it being a sloping lot meant that they wanted to have a walkout basement, which is always a good thing for finding space that might be below a typical square footage number to develop in the long run. They also were interested in having a 2-car garage, so we spoke a little bit about that. At that point, and this is early March of 2018, I was able to put together a construction ballpark. And what this does is shows our couples and clients what the buckets are that we're working with on a specific build. I also recommended, and they attended an open house. Typically, we were having open houses about once a month prior to the COVID thing that we have going on right now. Hopefully we can get back to that in the future. But we are doing a lot of Matterports, which are the virtual tours to allow people to kind of see the inside of our homes. And then occasionally we do have a home that we can get people into. What you're seeing now is that construction ballpark, which again is just a ballpark, and it's a litmus test for the budget. It shows you the buckets that we're working with, whether it's site work, finish levels, decks, porches, and breezeways, and basically just talking about the general scope of the project initially. We hope for this to be plus or minus 15%, and unfortunately, even just 2.5 years ago, it was about 30% less to build a home. So in 2020 prices, you could imagine this being 30% more. After we get past this stage and you're ready to commit, I put together a contract. I have you sign that contract, and then I introduce you to the architectural designer and design coordinator. And Jessica is going to speak to how that process unfolds.
So here you see milestone 1. They've had their conversations with Jay. They've identified scope and budget and had those discussions. We sit down, and the 3 things that we focused on at this phase were finding a builder. In this case, there was a local builder who was available, and that builder also happened to be a BrightBuilt Home veteran. He and his team had done multiple of our homes. And then we also decided to schedule a site walk with that builder and also with a factory scout car. And both of those, both the builder and the factory went out to the site to assess the house location, the conditions of the ledge, as well as site access. So bringing the modules in and making sure that it's possible. Milestone 2, the design process and finishes selections. So as we mentioned, this client was interested in the bungalow. It was a 2-bedroom, 2-bath with no second floor, and ground floor living, amounting to just over 1,000 square feet. That extra second floor is essentially the attic space, but there was an opportunity to prep it so that it could be used as bedroom space or living space in the future. And then the changes that we talked about pretty much stayed within the original scope that they described to Jay. So we flipped the orientation of the house to capture the views. We added a covered deck, and then there was a partial walkout basement that they left unfinished, but had access to from below, and they added a wood stove. They did choose mostly standard finishes, but opted for some site milled finishes that the owner could accomplish on site by himself. All in all, because the owner stayed very true to the original scope that they had described to Jay, and opted for the finishes that they had described, this project stayed within budget compared to the budget that, or the ballpark that we had initially drawn up with them. The builder did add in a contingency for site conditions, given that there was a challenging site. And here we see our wild cards. So a couple of unexpected things happened in this process. Wild card 1, right before they elected to go into production, they could not sell their home. And the sale of their home was crucial to moving forward. So this delayed the whole process for 8 months. While they tried to sell their home. It obviously stretched out the timeline, and it also had an effect on cost. Material and labor prices increased over those 8 months. We entered into a new calendar year, and the second wild card was the site conditions. They started digging on site and found a lot more ledge than they had expected and had to alter plans. Also, the excavator that they had originally elected to work with, that was the independent excavator, just happened to be slower than they needed the work to be done. So in this case, the owner had to make decisions to cut costs in various places, and the owner also made the decision to take out a small loan to cover those extra costs. Milestones 6 and 7, so delivery and site finish and move in. So the modules were brought in, the garage and covered deck and front porch had to be site built, but all in all, it was a fairly quick turnaround. The owner had a hard deadline, move-in date of late fall, so there were only a few months, a couple months that the builder and subcontractors had to get in and finish it so that it was move-in ready. And because of that hard deadline, the owner moved in and then gradually finished the interior work over the winter. The summary and highlights of this project, as you can see here, milestone 1 happened in July 2018, they signed on. Design and finishes and pricing happened from August to October of 2018, just over 3 to 4 months. And then that major wildcard hit in the fall of winter 2019, adding an 8-month delay that was unexpected. Once their house was able to sell, June 2019, they had their production kickoff, milestone 4. And things proceeded fairly quickly there. 3 months later, the house arrived on site in September, and the owner was able to move in November, a quick turnaround of just over 2 months. though they did move in partially unfinished. So the takeaways from this project are that the wildcards did delay the timeline, and the wildcards had some cost implication. One great thing about this project was that the builder was knowledgeable and could step in, such as provide an alternative excavator, and it made the process smoother. And the owner and builder also worked together to achieve a quick transition from set day to move-in.
Okay, so we're going to jump into example 2 now, who we are calling the Murphys. This is based on a project from 2019, and the project was a family of 4, young family of 4, 2 kids in southwestern New Hampshire. And they came in with the knowledge they were likely interested in the Cushing design or something similar to it. Their goals for the project were to create a healthy, comfortable environment for their children, one that was capable of producing a lot of its own energy, or more than, because they had a couple electrical cars. They also wanted to have a pretty clear budget going in and be able to keep to that budget. And because both of them are full-time, they work full-time and are raising their children full-time, they really wanted to have as simple and straightforward a design and decision-making process as possible. So these were the site conditions where they were planning to build a home. It was a beautiful spot on a quiet dirt rural road there in southwestern. There was an existing structure on the house site where they planned to put the home. Can everyone hear me right now? I just got a message that my connection might be a little funny.
Yes, you're fine.
Okay, great. Okay, so it was an open site. It was very close to the road, which is great for access in terms of both the delivery of the modules and the connection to utilities. The utilities themselves were fairly straightforward. And as mentioned, there was this one structure existing on the house site that needed to be moved in order to prep for the home. In their case, they also had a unique scenario whereby the excavation and most of the site work was going to be carried out by a family member. So they were going to be handling all of the site preparation internally. Financially similar to the Smiths, they were going to be using the funds from the sale of their existing home to put toward the construction and build out of this home. They had secured temporary rental housing to bridge the gap between the sale of their older home and the finish of this current home, but they were really trying to keep that timeline as short as possible. And coming into it, their budget in 2019, early 2019, was $450,000, not including any of the site work. So they were looking to spend about $450,000 for the house itself, with the features that you'll see in a moment. So this is the point at which they came to BrightBuilt and made their first call and reached out initially to Jay.
The Murphys gave me a shout at the beginning of 2019. It was, I think, March of 2019. They called and were interested in a Cushing. As Parlin said, they did have a Tesla and another plug-in car, so they wanted to be net positive, and they wanted a first floor master suite. They did have a couple kids, and they wanted to make sure that that was taken into account as well. They're very curious about the cost because this was a family-owned land, and they wanted to make sure they stayed within budget, even though the land was affordable for them. They wanted to make sure that there was a sunny deck on the sunny side of the home that featured a pastoral setting, which is really beautiful. And they wanted to be able to make some adjustments to design. These guys were project coordinators for their companies, and they were quick to make decisions and get into the office. So they were fun to work with. And I think as we talk through this timeline, it was one of the faster signing to set dates that we've had in some of our projects. The ballpark was early 2019, as I said, in March. Gave a general scope again to the buckets. And this one you'll see that there was no site work because, as Parlin said, they wanted to be able to do that site work, and they had the ability to do that. They were interested in mainly BrightBuilt level finishes, which I can speak to you when we talk on calls. They wanted a little bit of a siding upgrade and make sure that they had those decks and porches on the back side for that sunny side. As you can see, even as of last year, our costs have increased considerably, 15% over what we were seeing even just early last year. So demand is big right now, which is one of those driving components to the cost going up, as well as some tariffs placed on lumber. And then COVID is also affecting some of the pricing on different things. So at that point, we were comfortable with what we were looking at. We had them sign a contract, and we moved to introducing them to the architectural designer and design coordinator. And Carlin, I think, is going to speak to this one.
Yes. So yes, we had answered the questions that they had coming in. They had a clear enough sense of the design itself to understand that that was a good fit for what they were looking to do. So we got started right away in clearing some of the initial hurdles that we wanted to clear to ensure we could move forward with the modular aspect of the home. So as with the Smiths, we arranged for a scout car from the factory to go out and assess the site. The site itself, of course, was very close to the road, but the road was a fairly unmaintained dirt rural road. So they wanted to also verify that the road could support the modules coming down the road and the crane as well. So we confirmed that. We also talked through some of the coordination of the different elements that they were going to be handling internally, both the site preparation and the utilities preparation. So we wanted to make sure we covered all those bases before getting too deep into design. And then we wanted to get going as soon as possible on the design. The wild card that came up in this particular project was actually the builder. So they were in a region where we had not previously built a BrightBuilt, so we didn't have a builder with whom we had worked in that area just yet. So we began that process by reaching out, identifying some potential builders that had qualifications either through their experience with high performance, net zero, or in some cases as well as modular. So we began those conversations with a couple prospects that we had identified through our own internal networks of builders and organizations, professional organizations. And those with whom we spoke were really enthusiastic and really interested in working with us, but the timeline wasn't workable for their pipelines. So both builders that we identified and spoke to at that time couldn't start a new project until roughly 8 months from when we were talking. So that was beyond the timeline of when these particular clients, the Murphys, wanted to be completed with their home. So we shifted gears a little bit and actually brought in the person that they had already identified as their carpenter, who had also worked on other projects with the family for prior years. They had a pre-existing relationship with him, liked working with him. He was primarily a finished carpenter, so they hadn't initially considered him for the general contracting of the project. Given his availability, though, and given their existing relationship with him, they elected to work with him and also take on some of the GC work with organizing the tradespeople on their own. So at that point, a few weeks into that process, we identified who the builder was going to be, and we proceeded with design. So as noted, they were starting with a Cushing. This is the Cushing base design as designed. Obviously, it has the gable front entry here on the short edge of the house that orients theoretically towards the front of the house or even the street side of the house. And in their case, however, they were actually, the long edge of the house was going to be oriented to the road. So we made some modifications to make the design appropriate to the site. But generally speaking, the 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bath, ground floor master, 2,000 square feet with some extra space and room to grow into, fit really well with what they were seeking to do. And they also felt that the design vernacular was a really good fit for the area and the context of the site, this really bucolic kind of pastoral landscape that they were building in. So the changes they made were largely just moving around some aspects of the footprint on the first floor. They added a mudroom and a half bath at what would be their primary entry. It's normally sort of the front entry on this particular design, but as that long face of the house was oriented to the street, they made an official front door along that long edge, one that they actually personally probably won't use as frequently, given they'll be coming into the home through this mudroom and through this parking area here. But by adding this wraparound farmer's porch, they added an element of clarity to the two doors to lend this entry to really looking like the front door of the house for any visitors that would come by. Otherwise, changes to the first floor were fairly minor, some reconfiguration in the primary bathroom on that first floor. And then, of course, that addition of the space of the mudroom and the half bath. In the upstairs, the organization of the bedrooms and that bonus room are still very much similar to the base design, but with the moving of the stair, we found an opportunity for a little office room, an office niche really, in the corner of the house. And they were actually really thrilled with that bonus in the design modifications because it gave them some space. Each of them work from home on occasion, so it gave them the opportunity to carve out some space to do that work separate from the rest of the house. So the finishes selections process too, they opted for standing seam metal roof, locally milled wood siding, and they also went with the tilt turn windows for the window package throughout the house. So they made some selected adjustments to finishes, and then went, though, because of the interest of speed, went with as many factory installed finishes as they could. The kitchen cabinetry all came fully installed, for example. Some of the bath fixtures came installed. So they really, they did a little bit of picking and choosing and worked as hard as they could within the structure that we have at BrightBuilt in order to maximize on efficiencies. So we designed really quickly. They were very, very quick decision makers. So we moved quickly and right into the factory portion. Production kickoff, they went through the drawings from the factory, and then the factory got underway with its production. This was in fact the first project to come through the line at KBS Homes. KBS is one of three of the manufacturers with whom we are currently working. They're based here in Maine. We've now built upwards of 15 plus homes with them since we built this first one with them in the summer of 2019. So we've done a lot with them. And we made multiple visits up to the factory in the course of this initial project to ensure that all of the detailing and all of the specs were being followed per our requirements for the performance of our homes. Of course, while all this is happening on site, they were moving that existing barn, doing the excavation for the house foundation, pouring the foundation, and doing all the utilities prep. So there again, the opportunity to do these things concurrently is really, really tremendous with offsite construction. Milestone 6, modules arrive on site, set on their foundation, and then the things that were to be completed after the modules arrived, of course, were the build out of that farmer's porch, the installation of the standing seam metal roof, the siding, and then some minor interior finishes. They actually did an interior timber frame detail along the center line of the home and the cushioning, and then of course all of the standard installs vis-a-vis the flooring, some of the kitchen tile, the bathroom tile, the mechanicals, and other minor details were finished out after the house arrived on site. And then of course it was time to move in. So they arrived at their last milestone in November of 2019, a mere 7 months after starting design. So that's 7 months of combined design and construction, as opposed to what's typically upwards of an 8 to 12 month construction only process when you're building a new home on a given site. After the home was completed, or once they moved in, they still had some minor things to complete vis-a-vis some of those details, as well as some of the landscaping and exterior that got wrapped up in the time since. So to recap, they signed with us in March of 2019. We moved through design quickly and finished selections quickly in April and May. We had our production kickoff meeting in May of 2019, late May. And then in July and August, that's when production was going full steam ahead and the site prep was underway. September 2019, we saw delivery of the modules. November of 2019, they moved in. So the big takeaways from this project were orienting that new builder to our process and our performance specifications to ensure that he understood the detailing required in order to get the home to perform to our expectation. In this case, the homeowners also opted to hire and work with a kitchen designer to work on some of the decor details of their kitchen, as well as some of the cabinetry features that they were looking for in the cabinetry package itself. So just that added a little bit of coordination on our part, and also some cost to the clients. The owner and builder worked together, having known each other and having had an existing relationship, of course. They worked together to make a quick transition into the home. And the owner also, as I mentioned, helped coordinate with subcontractors coming in during the finish out, and took on actually some of that role as the builder with whom they were working was working out a lot of the carpentry details. So in summary, the target move-in deadline was met, and the budget, design, and performance goals were also met. So to recap again, here is the timeline laid out, those 7 steps in the timeline from sign-on and design kickoff to move in. Comprehensively, they comprise anywhere from 9 to 12 months in a typical project. But with the sidekicks, of course, that timeline gets reduced substantially, as noted in the subheadings there. So thank you so much for joining us today. We do have time right now for some questions. I guess I can, do you want to help facilitate going through some of those, Jay?
Here we have a couple, and speaking to that last project, Dave asked, are there any significant build differences between the 3 module builders? So I think he's speaking to the factories.
Oh, the 3 factories. There are not too many substantial differences between how they, or to what specification they build. There are some very minor changes in how they might achieve the vapor barrier, for example. Very minor things, but the performance is consistent across the board regardless of the approach. There are some differences in certainly where they can deliver to. So the 3 factories with whom we work, one is based in Maine, one is based in New Hampshire, and one is based in Pennsylvania. So each of the factories has a different range within which they can work, and may have some other nuanced differences between things they include or don't include in their pricing, such as delivery, set crews. So those are good questions to ask as you're digging in and deciding which factory makes sense. Generally, we help recommend. I will say the 2 factories that we work with in New England, the Maine and New Hampshire-based factories, are certainly the 2 that have done the vast majority of our work. So each of them has built now, the one in New Hampshire, several dozen homes, and the one in Maine, between 12 and 20 at this point. So.
And Sheila's asking, with the Murphys, was the solar array part of the package?
Solar is something that we will include in the initial ballpark so that there's an understanding as to roughly what the cost will add, but it's not something that's included in the construction costs in general, because in any project, if someone were to be shopping around, for example, from builder to builder, no builder will include the cost of 30 years of utilities in the cost of construction to build the home. And that's effectively what a solar array represents. It represents the cost of utilities for 30 years for the home, amortized over the life of the mortgage. And it represents a utility, and it also is dependent on how many people are living in the home, what the orientation is of the home, and what the overall performance is of the home. So it's a factor that varies house to house.
Great. This is a question that Tom had that kind of speaks to the process and the idea of how we help and assist each of our clients. In case of shoreland building restrictions for a city, i.e. lakefront, does BrightBuilt represent the client at a planning review meeting?
Jessica, you want to take this one?
Sure. So it's typically not part of our design process to represent the client at planning review meetings, although we're very happy to be involved and can work with you individually to on the logistics of how we might be involved.
So I'll actually just make a quick amendment to that, which is to say that when Jessica says it's typically not included, she's speaking specifically to our fixed fee structure. So it's absolutely a service we can offer. It's just not something that's built into the standard fixed fees, because it's generally speaking not something that's required for most projects, but it absolutely is something that we can do.
Good clarification. Thank you.
Sure.
We have another question concerning BrightBuilt finishes and asking, what are BrightBuilt finishes?
I can answer that one.
Okay.
So without getting into too much of the details, to streamline the finishes selection process, we've created a 3-tier system of selecting finishes: a standard tier, a BrightBuilt tier, and an architectural tier. And the BrightBuilt tier is sort of the mid-level tier of finishes. So they all have cost implications, but when we say BrightBuilt level finishes, that's what we're talking about.
And the reason we call them that too is because it represents generally where the vast majority of our clients fall. So it's in the realm of nice granite or quartz countertops, potentially for a kitchen, nice maple flooring, things that are really very nice, but not super, super high end. So there's sort of that middle ground of where generally most buyers are trending, and it's most consistently where our BrightBuilt homes land in terms of the finish package. That's why we've dubbed it BrightBuilt Finishes.
And I will say, in my conversations with clients, I'm speaking to some of those things and can share with you specifics on those, as well as build those into the construction ballpark that I'm working on with you. We have another question that we've talked about the increases in costs that we've seen over the past couple of years due to demand and tariffs and so on. This question is asking, what percentage of that 15 to 20% is lumber? And I think maybe Parlin might be able to speak to that, but at the same time, it's probably 50-50 in things costing more, as well as demand in trades folks costing more. So both of those things have risen over the past 2 years, which has increased the cost to that extent. So hopefully, we can get rid of some of these Canadian lumber tariffs and see some of that come down. We have one more question that we can shoot to you guys, which is, what are the considerations for site access? Do you have an idea of the height restrictions and required turning radius?
Yes, we can definitely speak to that, and we can do some very rudimentary analysis from Google Earth or Google Street View, depending on what your site has available for that sort of documentation. But one way we can get more definitive information is with the scout cars that were mentioned in both of the example cases. That can give industry insight as to whether access is going to be a concern or not. But yeah, I mean, there are general rules of thumb, certainly in terms of clearances. 13'6" is the kind of widespread height restriction. So if you have anything that's below 13'6", that might bear consideration. In terms of width, usually 15 to 16 feet is ample for a straight line clearance. But if you have to turn, you have to take into consideration the sweep. So there are various rules of thumb, each of which we could discuss with you depending on what your site, what concerns you might have for your site.
Along those lines, Parlin, Dave's asking about the width of modules and what the limit is, say, in Maine versus New Hampshire.
Yes, the width limit in Maine is unheard of in the modular industry. We have built now a couple of 18-foot wide modules, which have been built by the factory and shipped to their respective locations. That said, that width doesn't necessarily, being able to build to 18 feet doesn't mean that it can necessarily be shipped to your location. So we would want to make sure that that width can be shipped, that the roads that connect the factory to your site can support that width to be transported. Generally speaking, though, in other states as well as New Hampshire, the max width is between 15.6 and 16 feet. Again, depending on the state and depending on where you're trying to take the module to. So 14 feet is sort of the universal standard width. Anything over 14 is an over width or an extreme width load that often also requires sheriff's escorts or other permitting work because it goes beyond that 14-foot max.
I want to call attention to the fact that we just hit 1 hour of this presentation, and I realize that you guys are probably finished with your lunch. We appreciate the fact that you shared your time with us today. I want to thank Harlan and Jessica for doing a terrific job here. I also want to let you know, since I am typically the first person who you will talk to, my telephone number is 207-536-4685. My email is j@brightbuilthome.com. Anything else from you guys?
And that's the letter J at brightbuilthome.com.
Letter J at BrightBuilt Home.
Not J-A-Y.
We appreciate it, guys. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. There we go. Bye-bye.